And so what I found out with these military fortresses, which we call castles, and we romanticize them, but basically they were military fortresses, had ways in and out. And actually Richard the Lionhearted's army came through one of the guard robe shafts, which is why then they sort of changed the construction of...
Made it narrow.
That's right, so that you couldn't get a whole army through. But they did come through to this Chateau Gaillard, and that's how they were able to storm the castle, was through the guard robes. But, and so what would happen, because, you know, as you pointed out, these were self-sufficient. I mean, they had to be. You know, the castles were... you had to be able to close them to the enemy, so that all that food preparation and the laundry and so on and so forth, it all had to come from inside. The well, for example, and then the well would be inside the castle because it could be so easily poisoned by the enemy and so on if it were coming from the river. And so the guard robes either went into the moat, or as you say, over a bluff, or sometimes they went into a cesspit, which then people would travel throughout the country cleaning out cesspits, and that was just a whole subculture of workers.
Not unlike our septic tanks.
There
really.
you go.
And as a matter of fact, if you spend a lot of time going to castles, you will note that the moat where it was is often remarkably greener than anything around it.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a combo, I think, in part of the water, but a lot of it is that it just had incredibly
biology.
well
There you
fertilized
go.
soil.
There you go.
It is, you know, that the whole sanitary arrangements for any large community.
I know.
And people did get King Albert, or Prince Albert, you know, has theoretically died of typhoid from the bad drains at Windsor Castle.
Heavens.
There are all sorts of plagues and other, you know, misfortunes that struck communities living in those kinds of structures. And, you know, you think about the fact that people didn't bathe and, you know.
Oh, I know.
You have to have a really strong nose. Have you ever been to York and gone to the Jorvik Museum?
No.
Well, it's a Viking settlement that I think it was British Gas discovered whilst excavating in York to put up some stuff, and they came across a Viking settlement, so they paused and brought in all the the archaeologists and decided that they would create sort of a little Disney version.
Okay.
And they take you through it. You have to sit in something like if you were going through a tunnel of love in an amusement park. It's a little thing on tracks, and you're in those little, you know, carts with a thing that holds you down. But what they do is they take you by the privies.
My goodness.
And they have not only kept the sounds and the sights, but they have kept the smells,
Oh,
or
heavens.
reimagined the smells. And people literally gag,
Pass out, sure.
you know, as you're going past all that. And it reminds you that when we glamorize the past, and some of us think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to travel back?
No.
That probably all of us would die like flies because our immune systems aren't up to it. But more than that, we are just not prepared, I think, for the level.
No.
At which, and so I found that very interesting that your Swiss housewife
Oh, sure.
felt that she actually had to clean up, you know, all those centuries of
Muck.
excrement
Right.
in the shafts and was properly rewarded.
That's
but it's certainly clear that that would have been a
sure.
job.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, we bought a house once that a Swiss woman had lived in Baltimore, and her husband was doctor, Indian, New Delhi type Indian. And that house, I've never been in a residence that was that clean. It was so unbelievable. And I always had that stored away in the back of my mind, because it was hard for me to believe that people actually lived there with it being clean like that. And so I had that stored away. But also, what my medievalist friend told me at the University of Colorado, and I mentioned her in the acknowledgments and so on, is she said, when you're going down the hallways of some of these old castles, you can smell it. You know, even though the castle is open for tours and so on and so forth, that stench is still there. So,
interesting. Well, going back, let's see. Catering to Nobody was the first book, and you've mentioned a bit about the plot.
Sure.
Move us on, if you will, to Dying for Chocolate.
Well, Dying for Chocolate actually began when I was driving around with my mother. She lives in a very lovely area of Charlottesville, Virginia, and she said, well, so-and-so is just heartbroken because she's just been dumped by so-and-so across the street. And they're both 70-year-old millionaires. And I said, Mother, being dumped and heartbroken is not something I associate with 70-year-old multimillionaires. And she said, oh, you know so little. So then I thought, well, see, because caterers are asked to do very eccentric things. Because very wealthy people are eccentric about two things, food and money. And so I thought it wouldn't be too much of a stretch for Goldie to be doing aphrodisiac foods. And so I did a lot of research on aphrodisiac foods. Of course, we are in this small town, My husband and I have been married a very long time, 30 plus years. But I ordered all these books through interlibrary loan. Naked dinner, cooking in the nude, so on and so forth. They all came in at once. And the librarian shoved this large stack of books across the counter and said, "How's Jim?" But anyway, so I did all that research. And actually, one of my books, when I was here for Dying for Chocolate, there was a woman in line to buy the book. And she looked at my picture on the book, and she looked at me, and she looked at my picture of the book, and looked at me. And when she got to the front of the line, she said, "This is a very flattering picture." And so, this is no lie, no lie.
No wonder you haven't come back. I didn't realize you'd been insulted.
No, absolutely. But I'll tell you what, hey, what Somerset Maugham says is, nothing bad can happen to a writer. Everything is material. So I bore this in mind, got back to Denver, went for a makeover at a cosmetics counter, a department store. And this woman said, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I write murder mysteries." And she said, "Well, I sure could write a murder mystery about this place." And I said, "The cosmetics counter of a department store?" And she said, "You bet." So she started telling me about all these tricky goings on at the cosmetics counter. And I thought, this is good material, So I wrote it all up and talked to my agent and so on. "What do you think?" And she said she thought it was fine. And called this gal back, and she had been fired, which she predicted. So that whole book about the cosmetics and all the things that go on in a very cutthroat business, cosmetics, became Killer Pancake. And the seed of it was right here in Scottsdale.
Well, what a tribute. And I brag about how polite most of our customers are. We must have let one get away.
It was not impolite. It was not impolite. It was wonderful. It was because it became such good fodder, such good material.
I agree. I have heard that from other writers. See, Grafton and I once talked about that whole subject. She had a very difficult childhood, and I said to her once, "You've survived it well," and she said, "Oh hell," she said, "it's just all material."
That's right. That's exactly right.
And I think actually writing as therapy, for authors is probably terrific. All right, so we've done. I'll have to cheat here because I've forgotten the order. We've done
Dying
we did
for
Catering
to Nobody and Dying for Chocolate. Then the Serial Murders, which was the third book in the series.
Now let's spell cereal for those.
C-E-R-E-A-L.
Okay.
Because I thought, why has no one ever used this title?
It is a brilliant title. I remember when it came out, and I thought, how absolutely genius.
Well, it had never happened before, and at that time, what we were going through personally was that one of our children was applying to college. And parents can just show their true colors, their true nasty colors during the college application process for the kids. And what you see among the kids is these kids who had been really cohesive as a class kind of fall apart during this competitive stage of applying to colleges. And I had material myself because being from the East Coast, I knew about, the East Coast schools and so on. But I have to tell you, Barbara, I was at a party where this woman said to me, "Our son is at Columbia. That's in New York." I said, "Oh, okay." I thought it was in South America. This is, the Goldie voice inside my head. And so I thought, okay, this is material. I have to use it. Caterer is called in to prepare the SAT breakfasts. And so that's what got me going with that. And, what would be served and how the kids would be acting and so on and so forth at the school. So I wrote this book about this extreme competition between the kids and between the parents. And it begins, I'd kill to get into Stanford. So I went down to this meeting, consortium of college admissions counselors, and I put the manuscript in the hands of the Dean of Admissions at Stanford University. I said, "If you have any problems with this, please call me." Well, I never heard from him. But at this meeting, I met a fellow, I enjoyed him, an older man, was the director of admissions at Bowdoin. And I told him what my book was about. We just got into this conversation. And he said, "Well, that's very interesting because I used to be Dean of Admissions at Duke. And while I was there, we received a letter from a valedictorian of his class in, I believe it was Texas, is what he told me. And it said, 'Please withdraw my application to Duke University.'" So he sent back a pro forma letter to this applicant saying, "Thank you for your letter withdrawing your application. We wish you all success in your college career." A week later, he got a frantic call from the counselor at that high school saying, "Our valedictorian never withdrew her application for admission to Duke University, and you need to send us that letter to analyze the handwriting so we can find out who did." And it was another member of the class who had done this.
Was hoping for a place.
Right, that's right. And so all of this competition I'd written about in the Serial Murders was true.